The transport vessel Harmony's edge shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace, its hull groaning under the stress of deceleration. Captain Zexhai of the Corvani Empire stood on the bridge, his 4 arms crossed behind his back as he surveyed the holographic displays showing their destination. The human colony world of New Terra. "Status report," he commanded, his voice a low rumble that made the bridge crew flinch. "Sir, we've successfully intercepted the human evacuation convoy," reported Lieutenant Vosh, her tentacles dancing across the control interface. "3 civilian transports, minimal escort. They're requesting safe passage through neutral space." Zexhai's mandibles clicked with amusement. The humans always amused him with their naive faith in galactic law. The Corvani Empire had been expanding for 3 centuries, and no species had ever successfully resisted their advance. These particular humans were refugees from the recently conquered Proxima colonies, seeking sanctuary wherever they could find it. "Open a channel," he ordered. The main screen flickered to life, revealing the bridge of the lead human vessel. A middle-aged man with graying hair and tired eyes appeared, flanked by what appeared to be his senior officers. Behind them, Zexhai could see other humans moving about with the desperate efficiency of people who had already lost everything once. "This is Captain Rodriguez of the civilian transport New Hope," the human said, his voice steady despite the obvious fear in his eyes. "We're carrying non-combatants seeking asylum. We have no weapons and pose no threat to your vessels." "Captain Rodriguez," Zexhai replied, allowing his voice to carry the weight of imperial authority. "I am Captain Zexhai of the Corvani Third Fleet. Your vessels have entered space claimed by the Empire. By galactic law, you are now subjects of the Empire." Rodriguez's jaw tightened. "These are civilian ships. We have families aboard, children. Surely the Empire can show mercy to non-combatants." "The Empire shows mercy to those who serve it," Zexhai said. "You will prepare for boarding. Any resistance will result in the immediate destruction of your vessels." The transmission ended, and Zexhai turned to his tactical officer. "Prepare boarding teams. Standard procedure for human acquisition. Adult males to the labor camps, females and children to the processing centers." What Zexhai didn't know was that among the refugees aboard the New Hope sat a 17-year-old girl named Sarah Chen. Small, even by human standards, with delicate features and large dark eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, she looked like exactly what the Corvani would expect from a fragile human child. She sat quietly in the passenger compartment, reading from a worn tablet while other refugees around her wept or prayed. Sarah's fingers moved across the tablet's surface, not reading entertainment or seeking comfort, but analyzing the tactical situation unfolding around them. She had been tracking the Corvani fleet's movements through the ship's limited sensor data, calculating approach vectors, weapons ranges, and boarding probabilities. In her mind, she was already 3 moves ahead. "Sarah, sweetheart," called Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman who had taken it upon herself to look after the younger refugees. "Maybe you should put that away. We don't know what's going to happen." Sarah looked up, her expression calm and almost serene. "It's okay, Mrs. Patterson. I'm just reading." What she didn't mention was that she was reading the complete tactical manual of the Corvani Imperial Fleet, which she had memorized during the 3-day journey from Proxima. Sarah had what others called an unusual hobby. She studied warfare, not just human military history, but the combat doctrines, fleet movements, and strategic thinking of every species in the known galaxy. Her parents had thought it was just a phase, a young girl's way of processing the violence that had driven them from their home. They had no idea that their quiet, bookish daughter possessed one of the most brilliant tactical minds the human species had ever produced. The boarding alarms began to sound throughout the ship. Captain Rodriguez's voice came over the intercom, strained but trying to remain calm. "All passengers, please remain seated. We are being boarded by Corvani forces. Do not resist. I repeat, do not resist. Sarah closed her tablet and slipped it into her backpack. Around her, people were hugging each other goodbye, understanding that this might be the last time families would be together. Children cried while their parents tried to comfort them with lies about everything being okay. The sound of cutting tools echoed through the ship's hull. The Corvani were efficient. Sarah had to give them that. They had isolated the ship's communications, disabled its engines, and were now gaining access through 3 different airlocks simultaneously. Classic boarding doctrine designed to overwhelm any resistance and prevent coordinated defense. The first Corvani soldiers through the airlock were exactly what Sarah expected. 7 feet tall, covered in chitinous armor, with 4 arms each carrying different weapons. They moved with the practiced efficiency of a species that had conquered dozens of worlds. Behind them came their officers, distinguished by more elaborate armor and additional cybernetic enhancements. All humans will form orderly lines, announced the lead officer in accented standard. You will be processed according to Imperial guidelines. Resistance will result in termination. As the refugees began to shuffle into lines, Sarah noticed something the adults had missed. The Corvani were using a standard occupation protocol designed for primitive species. They had separated into small teams, relying on their technological superiority and the humans' assumed helplessness to maintain control. It was an efficient system, proven across dozens of conquests. It was also predictable. Sarah moved quietly through the crowd, her small size allowing her to slip between the confused refugees without drawing attention. She made her way toward the cargo bay, where the ship's emergency systems were located. Her parents had always worried about her tendency to wander off and explore, never understanding that she was mapping every ship, station, and building they ever visited. Knowledge was power, and power was survival. The cargo bay was unguarded. The Corvani assumed that terrified refugees would remain huddled together, seeking comfort in numbers. They didn't expect a 17-year-old girl to be thinking tactically, while everyone else was thinking emotionally. Sarah reached the emergency systems panel and began working quickly. The New Hope was an old ship, but it had been retrofitted with modern safety systems after a series of accidents in the outer colonies. Those systems included automated distress beacons, emergency communications arrays, and most importantly, an independent power grid that could operate even if the main engines were disabled. Her fingers flew across the interface as she accessed the ship's communication logs. The Corvani had jammed outgoing transmissions, but they hadn't thought to scrub the existing data. Sarah downloaded everything: fleet positions, communication protocols, even fragments of military communications that the ship's sensors had passively intercepted during their journey. But information was only useful if you could act on it, and Sarah had a plan for that too. She activated the ship's internal communication system, routing it through the emergency network to avoid Corvani monitoring. Her voice, calm and clear, reached every speaker throughout the refugee convoy. Attention all passengers and crew. My name is Sarah Chen. I need everyone to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you. On the bridge of the Harmony's Edge, Captain HFY looked up from his tactical display as his communications officer reported the unauthorized transmission. Sir, there's an internal broadcast coming from the human ships. Should we jam it? HFY gestured dismissively with one of his lower arms. Let them have their final words. It will make the processing easier if they think they're maintaining some dignity. He had no way of knowing that he had just made the first of many critical errors, because Sarah Chen wasn't saying goodbye. She was taking command. I know you're all scared, Sarah's voice continued over the intercom. I know this seems hopeless, but I need you to understand something important. The Corvani think we're helpless because we're not warriors. They think we're weak because we're refugees. They're wrong. In the passenger compartments, refugees looked up at the speakers with confusion. Who was this girl? How was she even able to broadcast? The Corvani have conquered many species, but they've never faced humans before. Not really. They've studied our colony worlds, our merchant fleets, our peaceful settlements. But they've never seen what humans can do when we're truly threatened. They're about to learn. Sarah paused, her fingers still working at the control panel. She was accessing the ship's manufacturing systems now, the 3D printers and fabrication units that every long-range vessel carried for repairs and maintenance. In 30 seconds, the emergency lighting is going to go out. When it does, I need everyone to move exactly where I tell you to move. Quickly, quietly, and without question. We have one chance to show the galaxy what humans are really capable of. On the Corvani ships, soldiers were beginning to report strange sounds from within the human vessels. Mechanical noises like machinery activating. Captain HFY frowned. Perhaps the humans were attempting to sabotage their own ships rather than face capture. "Increase the pace of boarding," he ordered. "Full teams on all vessels. If the humans want to destroy themselves, we'll relieve them of the burden." But Sarah wasn't destroying anything. She was building. The emergency lights went out exactly when she said they would, plunging the ship into the red glow of backup lighting. In the confusion that followed, refugees began moving through the corridors with surprising coordination. Not panicked flight, but purposeful movement, guided by a voice that seemed to anticipate every step, every obstacle, every Corvani patrol route. What the Corvani soldiers encountered in those darkened corridors would later be studied in military academies across the galaxy. They found not helpless refugees, but organized resistance cells that moved like they had been training together for months. Improvised weapons that shouldn't have existed, manufactured from ship components in impossible time frames. Defensive positions that exploited every weakness in Corvani armor and tactics. And at the center of it all, a 17-year-old girl whose quiet voice continued to guide the battle from the shadows, turning 3 ships full of terrified civilians into something the galaxy had never seen before: humans at war. Captain HFY received the first casualty reports 20 minutes after boarding began. 5 Corvani soldiers dead, 12 wounded, and somehow 3 teams trapped in what appeared to be carefully prepared kill zones. It was impossible. These were refugees, not soldiers. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "we're detecting coordinated resistance across all 3 ships. They appear to be using our own boarding doctrine against us." HFY's mandibles clicked with growing concern. In 3 centuries of conquest, no species had ever turned Corvani tactics back on the Corvani themselves. It required not just courage, but an intimate understanding of their military protocols. "Who is coordinating their resistance?" he demanded. The answer came in the form of another ship-wide broadcast from the human fleet. Sarah's voice, still calm, still impossibly controlled for someone her age, filled the bridges of both human and Corvani vessels. "Captain HFY, this is Sarah Chen. I'd like to discuss terms for your surrender." The bridge fell silent. In the background, they could hear the sounds of battle still raging in the corridors of the human ships. But now those sounds carried a different meaning. The Corvani weren't winning. They were losing. And somehow, impossibly, they were losing to a teenage girl who had just politely asked for their surrender. Captain HFY stared at the speaker, his forearms trembling slightly with a mixture of rage and something he had never felt before in battle: uncertainty. The humans, he was beginning to realize, were not what they appeared to be. Captain HFY stared at the communication display in disbelief. The small human girl's image filled the screen, her dark eyes looking directly at him through wire-rimmed glasses that made her appear even younger than her 17 years. Behind her, he could see the converted cargo bay of the human ship, now clearly serving as some kind of command center, with other refugees working at jury-rigged control stations. "You wish to discuss surrender terms?" HFY's voice carried the incredulity he felt. "Child, you are aboard civilian transports facing the might of the Corvani Third Fleet. You have no weapons, no trained soldiers, no hope of victory. Sarah tilted her head slightly, a gesture that reminded Zexhai uncomfortably of how his own tactical instructors used to look when a student had made an obvious error. Captain, with respect, I think you misunderstood. I wasn't asking you to surrender. I was offering you the chance to do so before this situation becomes worse for your fleet. Worse? Zexhai's mandibles clicked with amusement. Young human, my boarding teams are securing your vessels as we speak. Actually, Captain, your boarding teams are trapped in compartmentalized sections of our ships with no way to retreat or advance. In the last 30 minutes, you've lost 17 soldiers with 23 more wounded. Your tactical doctrine assumes overwhelming force against disorganized resistance. You're currently facing organized resistance that knows your doctrine better than you do. Sarah paused, consulting a tablet that one of the refugees handed her. Your remaining forces are spread across 17 different positions throughout our 3 ships. Each position has been isolated from your command structure and is now subject to what I believe you call selective elimination protocols. Would you like me to demonstrate? Before Zexhai could respond, alarms began blaring throughout his ship. His tactical officer looked up from his console with confusion. Sir, we're detecting explosions aboard the human vessels, multiple sections showing atmosphere loss. The humans are destroying their own ships, Zexhai concluded. Desperate measures. But Sarah's voice came through the communication channel with the same calm tone. Captain, I've just eliminated your boarding team in Section 7 of the New Hope. They were positioned in what used to be the ship's water reclamation facility. By opening the valves to the waste processing system and then introducing an electrical surge through the deck plating, I was able to create a localized explosion that eliminated all 6 soldiers while leaving the rest of the ship intact. The tactical display confirmed her words. 6 Corvani life signs had just vanished from Section 7. Your boarding team in Section 12 of the Freedom's Dream will be eliminated in approximately 40 seconds when the atmospheric recycling system I've reprogrammed finishes flooding their position with nitrogen. The team in Section 3 of the Last Hope has about 2 minutes before the gravity generators I've overloaded create a localized gravity well that will crush them. Zexhai watched in horror as his tactical display began showing exactly what the human girl predicted. Life signs winking out in precise sequence, not from random accidents, but from carefully planned and executed eliminations. How? He whispered. You study your enemies, Captain. Every species the Corvani Empire has conquered, you've studied their technology, their tactics, their psychology. But you never studied what they could become when they had nothing left to lose. And you certainly never studied humans who had time to study you back. Sarah stood up from her position, and for the first time, Zexhai could see her full form. She was tiny, barely 5 feet tall, wearing simple civilian clothes that hung loosely on her small frame. She looked like exactly what she was supposed to be, a refugee child fleeing from violence. But her eyes, magnified slightly by her glasses, held an intelligence that made Zexhai's chitin crawl. 3 months ago, when the Corvani Empire conquered the Proxima colonies, you made a mistake, Sarah continued. You allowed some of the human population to escape instead of eliminating them all immediately. During those 3 months, while we were traveling to find sanctuary, I studied every piece of information about Corvani military doctrine that I could find. She gestured to the other refugees working around her. These people think I've been reading entertainment or educational materials to cope with the trauma. They don't realize I've been memorizing the complete technical specifications of every Corvani vessel class, every boarding protocol, every tactical doctrine your empire has used in the last 50 years. That's impossible, Zexhai said. The volume of information alone would require cybernetic enhancement. Captain, humans don't need cybernetic enhancement to process information. We need motivation. And you've given me plenty of motivation by threatening to separate families and send people to labor camps. The tactical display showed more of his teams being eliminated in precisely the sequence Sarah had predicted. Each death was surgical, using the ship's own systems as weapons. It was brilliant, ruthless, and completely unprecedented in galactic warfare. "What do you want?" Zexhai asked. "Right now, I want you to withdraw your remaining boarding teams to safe positions while we discuss terms. In 5 minutes, I want you to signal the rest of your fleet to stand down. In 10 minutes, I want you to begin transmitting a full report of this engagement to Corvani High Command." "And why would I do that?" Sarah's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes made Zexhai step back from the screen. "Because, Captain, what you've seen so far is just me working with the materials at hand on 3 civilian ships with no weapons and no trained soldiers. I want your empire to know what one untrained human can accomplish with nothing but intelligence and motivation." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Now imagine what we could do if we were actually trying to fight you." The communication ended, leaving Zexhai staring at a blank screen. Around him, his bridge crew waited for orders. But for the first time in his military career, the captain of the Harmony's Edge had no idea what those orders should be. His tactical officer broke the silence. "Sir, should we withdraw the boarding teams?" Zexhai looked at his display. In the last hour, he had lost over 30 soldiers to a group of refugees led by a teenage girl. His remaining teams were trapped in positions that could be eliminated at any moment by someone who seemed to know his ship's systems better than his own engineers. "Withdraw all teams," he ordered. "Fall back to safe positions and await further orders." "Sir?" The tactical officer looked confused. "We're retreating from civilian vessels?" "We're tactically repositioning," Zexhai corrected, but even he didn't believe his own words. As the surviving Corvani soldiers began their retreat from the human ships, Sarah Chen stood in her improvised command center, surrounded by refugees who were beginning to understand that their quiet, bookish companion was something far more dangerous than any of them had imagined. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman who had worried about Sarah's reading habits, approached her carefully. "Sarah, dear, what you just did, how did you learn to do that?" Sarah looked up from her tablet where she was analyzing the Corvani fleet's new positions and calculating their next likely moves. "I read a lot, Mrs. Patterson, and I remember everything I read." "But child, that wasn't reading. That was warfare." "Yes," Sarah said simply. "I read about warfare. Human warfare, Corvani warfare, warfare from every species in the galaxy. Most people read fiction for entertainment. I read military history." Dr. Harrison, one of the ship's passengers who had been a university professor before the conquest, stared at Sarah with newfound understanding. "The papers you were always reading during the journey, they weren't homework or entertainment." "Tactical manuals," Sarah confirmed. "Fleet doctrine, battle reports, technical specifications. Everything I could find about how the Corvani Empire fights and how everyone else has failed to stop them." "And you memorized all of that?" "I memorized it, analyzed it, and found the patterns. Every species the Corvani have conquered made the same mistake. They tried to fight the Corvani using their own traditional tactics. Nobody ever tried to fight them using Corvani tactics better than the Corvani themselves." Captain Rodriguez, who had been listening from the doorway, stepped forward. "Sarah, what you did today, it was incredible. But we're still just 3 civilian ships facing an entire fleet. What happens when they decide to simply destroy us from a distance?" Sarah turned back to her tablet, her fingers dancing across the interface. "That depends on whether Captain Zexhai is smart enough to realize what just happened here." "What do you mean?" "I mean that the Corvani Empire has been expanding for 3 centuries by conquering species that either couldn't fight back or couldn't fight smart. Today, they encountered humans for the first time. Not human colonies or human merchants or human diplomats. They encountered humans at war. She looked up at the adults surrounding her, all of whom were staring at her with expressions of awe, fear, and growing hope. The question now is whether the Corvani Empire is smart enough to be afraid of what they just learned about us, because if they're not, Sarah's voice trailed off as she returned to her calculations. If they're not, then they're going to keep underestimating humans until someone shows them just how dangerous that mistake can be. On the bridge of the Harmony's edge, Captain HFY was discovering that retreat from human vessels was not the end of his problems, but the beginning of entirely new ones. His long-range sensors were detecting movement throughout the system, ships that had been hidden in the asteroid fields and behind planetary bodies suddenly revealing themselves. "Sir," his sensor operator reported, "we're detecting multiple human vessels moving toward our position. They appear to be military craft." Military? HFY felt his mandibles click with confusion. Intelligence reports indicated this system contained only civilian populations. "Sir, the vessels are broadcasting identification codes. They appear to be ships from various human colonies, not fleet vessels, but they're armed and moving in formation." As HFY watched, more and more contacts appeared on his screen. Merchant vessels that had been retrofitted with weapons. Mining ships carrying improvised missile launchers. Even small personal craft that had somehow been equipped with military-grade sensors and communication arrays. His communication officer looked up with an expression that HFY was beginning to recognize as the precursor to very bad news. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the approaching human fleet. It's addressed to the young human female on the refugee vessel." "Put it through," HFY ordered. The main screen filled with the image of a grizzled human male in a military-style uniform that had seen better days. Behind him, HFY could see the bridge of what appeared to be a converted mining vessel, with crew members working at stations that had clearly been assembled from whatever equipment was available. "Sarah Chen, this is Colonel Marcus Webb, commanding the Free Human Defense Force. We received your tactical broadcast and your assessment of the Corvani fleet disposition. We're ready to implement your suggested battle plan on your command." Sarah's voice came through the communication channel from the refugee ship. "Colonel Webb, thank you for responding. Please maintain your current positions and await further orders. I'm still negotiating with Captain HFY." "Understood, Sarah. The fleet stands ready." The transmission ended, and HFY found himself staring at a tactical situation that had gone from a simple refugee interdiction to something he had never encountered in 3 decades of military service. Somehow, this human child had not only defeated his boarding teams, but had also coordinated with a hidden fleet of human vessels that appeared to be taking orders from her. "Sir," his tactical officer said quietly, "recommend we signal for reinforcements." HFY nodded, but he was beginning to suspect that reinforcements might not be enough. Because if this small human girl could accomplish this much with 3 civilian ships and a handful of refugees, what could she do with an actual military force at her disposal? He was about to find out. The emergency council chamber aboard the Corvani flagship buzzed with tension as Captain HFY faced his senior officers. The holographic display in the center of the room showed the current tactical situation. His Third Fleet, one of the Empire's most successful conquest forces, effectively held in stalemate by a collection of human refugee ships and converted civilian vessels. "Report," HFY commanded, though he dreaded what he was about to hear. Commander Vextar, his second-in-command, activated the tactical display. "Sir, the human fleet has grown to 47 vessels over the past 6 hours. They appear to be using some form of communication network that our sensors cannot intercept or jam. New ships arrive already knowing exactly where to position themselves for maximum tactical advantage." "What type of vessels?" HFY asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. "Converted civilian craft, sir. Mining ships, cargo haulers, passenger transports, even personal recreational vessels. But they've all been modified with weapons and defensive systems that shouldn't be possible given their original specifications. Chief Engineer Kothmal brought up another display. Sir, I've been analyzing the modifications the humans have made to their ships. They're using a combination of technologies from dozens of different species, integrated in ways that violate every known principle of engineering compatibility. By all rights, these systems should be tearing their ships apart. But they're not, Zexhai observed. No, sir, they're not. In fact, they appear to be more efficient than our own systems in many respects. It's as if someone took the best elements from every technology in the galaxy and found a way to make them work together. Zexhai felt his chitin prickle with unease. Someone with extensive knowledge of galactic technology. Yes, sir. Someone who understands not just human engineering but Corvani systems, Altarian power cores, Zenthari weapons technology, Vilkan defensive arrays. The integration patterns suggest a level of cross-species technical knowledge that should be impossible for any single individual. The communication officer interrupted with the announcement that Zexhai had been both expecting and dreading. Sir, incoming transmission from the human refugee vessel. It's the young female again. On screen. Sarah Chen appeared on the display, still seated in her improvised command center aboard the New Hope. But now Zexhai could see that her setup had evolved. Multiple screens showed tactical displays, communication feeds, and what appeared to be real-time engineering schematics of both human and Corvani vessels. Around her, other refugees worked at stations that had been transformed into a sophisticated command and control center. Good evening, Captain Zexhai, Sarah said politely. I trust you've had time to assess your current situation. I have, Miss Chen. I find myself curious about how a 17-year-old human refugee has managed to coordinate a fleet action that has effectively neutralized one of the Empire's primary naval forces. Sarah smiled, an expression that somehow managed to be both innocent and terrifying. I told you I like to read, Captain. What I didn't mention is that I also like to write. Write? Tactical scenarios, battle plans, strategic analyses. For the past 3 months, while everyone thought I was coping with trauma by reading, I was actually developing comprehensive plans for human resistance to Corvani occupation. She gestured to one of her displays. I've written detailed instructions for converting civilian vessels into military craft using readily available components from any major spaceport. I've created communication protocols that allow decentralized command structures to operate without detectable coordination signals. I've designed tactical doctrines specifically adapted to counter every known Corvani fleet formation. That's impossible, Commander Vextar interjected. The complexity alone would require years of military training and experience. Commander, that's the difference between human intelligence and Corvani assumptions about intelligence, Sarah replied calmly. You assume that complex analysis requires formal training because that's how your society works. Humans don't need formal training to think. We just need access to information and the motivation to use it. She paused, her fingers moving across her tablet. During our 3-month journey from Proxima, I had access to the complete databases of 4 different human colonies, including their military archives, technical libraries, and historical records. I also had access to intercepted Corvani transmissions, captured equipment specifications, and detailed intelligence reports from every human world your empire has attacked. And you processed all of that information? I processed it, analyzed it, synthesized it, and used it to develop what you might call the first comprehensive human doctrine for asymmetric warfare against technologically superior opponents. Captain Zexhai felt something he had never experienced in his long military career, the cold certainty of impending defeat. What do you want from us, Miss Chen? What I've wanted from the beginning, Captain. I want you to contact Corvani High Command and report exactly what happened here today. They won't believe it. Then they'll make the same mistakes you did, And the next time the Corvani Empire encounters human resistance, that resistance will be even better prepared. Sarah stood up, and her small form somehow filled the screen with presence that made HFY's experienced officers step back unconsciously. Captain, your empire has conquered dozens of species over the past 3 centuries. Every conquest followed the same pattern: overwhelming technological superiority against opponents who tried to fight using their own traditional methods. Yes, today, you encountered something new. You encountered a species that doesn't have its own traditional military methods because we're too young as a spacefaring civilization to have developed them. Instead, we learned from everyone else. We studied every defeat, every successful resistance, every tactical innovation in galactic history. She gestured to her displays. The fleet you're facing isn't using human tactics or Corvani tactics or any single species approach to warfare. We're using the best elements from every military doctrine in the galaxy, adapted specifically to counter your strengths and exploit your weaknesses. And you developed all of this yourself? I developed the framework. But, Captain, I'm not the only human who reads military history. I'm just the one who happened to be on these ships when you decided to attack us. Sarah's expression became serious. There are thousands of human refugees scattered across the galaxy right now. Most of them are trying to rebuild their lives peacefully. But some of them are studying, learning, preparing. She leaned forward slightly. Captain, what you encountered today was 3 ships of refugees and a girl with a tablet. What do you think will happen when your empire faces humans who have had time to prepare properly? The transmission ended, leaving the Corvani officers staring at a blank screen. Around them, the tactical displays showed the human fleet maintaining perfect formation, waiting patiently for orders from their 17-year-old commander. Sir, the communications officer said quietly, High Command is requesting a full report on the engagement. Captain HFY looked at his officers, all of whom were veterans of multiple successful conquests. Today, they had all learned something new about the nature of intelligence, warfare, and the dangerous potential of underestimating an enemy. Prepare a complete tactical analysis, he ordered. Include all sensor data, communication logs, and battle recordings. Make sure High Command understands exactly what we encountered here. Sir, they may question our competence. Commander, if High Command doesn't understand the implications of today's engagement, our competence will become irrelevant very quickly. HFY turned back to the display showing the human fleet. 47 ships crewed by refugees and commanded by a teenage girl had just demonstrated that everything the Corvani Empire thought it knew about human capabilities was wrong. Sir, his tactical officer asked, what are your orders regarding the human fleet? HFY considered the question carefully. His fleet still had superior firepower. He could probably destroy the human vessels, though the cost would be significant. But destroying them wouldn't eliminate the knowledge they represented. It wouldn't stop other humans from reading the same materials, drawing the same conclusions, and developing even more sophisticated resistance strategies. Signal the human fleet, he decided. Inform Miss Chen that we are withdrawing from this system and that the refugee convoy has safe passage to their destination. Sir, today we learned something important, Commander. We learned that humans are not another primitive species to be conquered and catalogued. They're something else entirely. On the screen, the human ships maintained their formation, waiting patiently while their young commander finished demonstrating that the most dangerous weapon in the galaxy wasn't advanced technology or superior firepower. It was intelligence, applied with desperate determination by a species that had nothing left to lose and everything to learn. 3 hours later, as the Corvani Third Fleet jumped to hyperspace, Sarah Chen sat in the observation lounge of the New Hope, finally allowing herself to appear as young as she actually was. Around her, the other refugees were celebrating their survival and freedom, but Sarah was already thinking ahead to what came next. Mrs. Patterson found her there, still reading from her tablet. "What are you studying now, dear?" the elderly woman asked gently. Sarah looked up with a slight smile. "Galactic politics, Mrs. Patterson. Military tactics can win battles, but if we want to survive as a species, we need to understand how to win the peace that comes after." "You really think there will be more fighting?" "I think, Mrs. Patterson, that today was just the beginning. The Corvani Empire will report what happened here, and other species will start to take notice. Some will want to ally with us, others will see us as a threat. We need to be ready for both possibilities." Sarah returned to her tablet, her young mind already working on the next phase of humanity's emergence as a galactic power. Behind her wire-rimmed glasses, her eyes held the same calm intelligence that had just changed the balance of power in the galaxy. The fragile girl, who no one had paid attention to, was gone. In her place sat someone who would reshape how the galaxy thought about humanity, warfare, and the dangerous potential of underestimating a species that had learned to read between the lines of every conflict in galactic history. The real war, Sarah knew, was just beginning. But for the first time since the Corvani Empire had begun its expansion 3 centuries ago, they would be facing an enemy that understood their methods better than they understood themselves. And that enemy was a species that had turned learning into their greatest weapon.